Yes, thank you, Mr. Curtis. I walk to work every day, just letting you know that. And I haven't used a plastic disposable water bottle since I've been here on Capitol Hill. So thank you so much, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Case.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Oneil and Dr. Gonzalez, I've got two questions, one for each of you, both sides of the same coin. I'll give them to you both up front. And Dr. Oneil, I'll start with kind of a very abbreviated story from my own home state of Hawaii, where the indigenous peoples of Hawaii, the Native Hawaiians, lived for generations and generations in isolation, no contact, very ecologically and environmentally balanced and sustainable society. And then what happened was the first Western ships brought with them rats. And the rats wreaked havoc on the local wildlife and also on human beings. And so therefore, we imported the mongoose from India to take care of the rats. Well, the mongoose started killing off the fowl population, and they went from hero to enemy. And so we brought in something else to take care of the mongoose, and et cetera, et cetera. You can see that sometimes the best intentions of humans are not as good as what nature wrote to start with. And I say that by way of asking you this question. When I hear your testimony, what I hear you saying is that, hey, we've got a climate change problem. We've got incredible risk to our public lands, to include our forests, and obviously that is creating a number of problems, whether it be wildfires or whether it be the lack of a natural solution to climate change and CO2 emissions. But the way to do that is to harvest the forest. And I just pause on that when I think about it from a science perspective, because you're asking me to really say that my solution to the problem I had in Hawaii was to introduce another human solution, when the problem was the rat coming in to start with. The problem was climate change to start with. And so I just ask you to comment on, are you saying that the out in terms of the impact of climate change on our public lands is to enhance harvesting, or is it a human solution? I'm just having I'm not a scientist, I'm not a climate scientist, but I'm a skeptic of that position, as opposed to just going back to a more natural cycle. I'm sorry, and Dr. Gonzalez, the flip side is there a way to manage our forests that helps climate change, okay? So
I think the challenge is do nothing or log it to the beach. And that's not actually an alternative that you would look at in terms of the national forests, which is where I've done a lot of this analysis and work. Those are areas that are available. They're considered timberlands. And there are a lot of different alternatives of the way that you would treat those forests to get to a condition that was more fire resilient. Like the example that you just explained, and I was just in Hawaii at Christmas, so I got this story of the errors of the mongoose way. But the idea that we could, if we just leave it to nature, everything would be wonderful, would suggest that we haven't spent 40 or 50 years doing fire suppression, and therefore the historic fire return interval would be such that we would get back to a natural condition. And because we're so far out of sync, that's not actually possible.
So you're saying we're out of sync because of human, are you saying that we're out of sync because of human-caused management and we have to get back into sync by human ways?
It's a combination of all of those things. It's a combination of the management decisions that were made in the last 100 years, including stopping all fires by 10 a.m.
Okay.
And the recognition of that, probably, like I said, for the past 30 or 40 years, fire ecologists are saying, we're going to have a problem, we're going to have a problem. Okay. And now we have a problem.
Okay. I get it. I appreciate your answer. That was an honest answer. Dr. Gonzalez, what do you think? Can we handle climate change in some forest management way to include harvesting, continued harvesting? What does that do?
Published scientific research by my colleagues at University of California, Berkeley, in Yosemite National Park and elsewhere, shows that prescribed burning and the use of wildland fire can effectively restore ecosystem function to our forests, and that it reduces risks of high-severity fire in the future, improves their resilience to drought, and improves soil moisture. Also, fire is more efficient, cost-effective, and environmentally sound than timber harvesting or thinning. I'd underline also that prescribed burning also results in long-term accumulation of carbon, which naturally reduces climate change. And the way it does that is you remove the small trees and the large trees get larger. And over the long term, the research shows that the large trees will store more carbon than you release in the short-term burn.
Okay. I'm out of time, so I'm not gonna do this. So you're saying, just briefly, yes, there are appropriate forest management techniques that actually help climate change.
Yes, prescribed burn and wildland fire.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Case. The chair recognizes Mr. Bishop.
Thank you. Dr. Oneil, I appreciate you not speaking in glittering generalities, but I got 1 minute to ask this question and have it answered. It was traditionally, forests are thought of as carbon sink to suck up carbon. Instead, they are now emitting it. Are there, in your opinion, some creative ways of forest resiliency that we could use for these extreme events that we've had? Like I say, 41 seconds. Go for it.
There are a number of examples that are occurring here. There's an example in Arizona where they're looking at forest restoration. They remove the trees. They have to find a market for them. Unfortunately, there are no markets to be found. And part of their requirement is actually to do the fire risk reduction and get rid of all the biomass before they can move on to the next area. And I think this is important. When you harvest, you also have to treat those residues through, usually through some kind of a fire effort. Now, the challenge is...
I'm sorry. Let me go on with this. So you're talking about there are practices, but they also have to have some private sector economy to make them functionable at the same time.
Absolutely.
All right. Mr. Cole, I appreciate the fact that you were here when none of your company actually was going to attend last year, so thank you for accepting a Democrat invitation. I think it clearly illustrates how crony capitalism was working very well in the last administration and may do it again in the future. I've been reading in Matthew about how Christ and John talked about the hypocrites, except the word hypocrite comes from a Greek word which actually is better translated as a play actor. There are roles people are playing, and I think we have roles that people are playing here. Now, the slur against Patagonia is it's Patagonia made in China because that's what all the labels say. I want everyone to know that's not true. I cleaned out my closet and found a vest that was purchased from Patagonia, so I looked at the label, and it was not made in China. It was made in Sri Lanka. So the $900 billion industry you're talking about, which is a slight exaggeration, is basically there to improve the bottom line, not necessarily improve the planet. So, for example, the stuff that is made in China by your company clearly put out the statement that we've made the choice not to disengage with countries on the basis of their policies. Wish you would do that in the United States as well. But amongst those policies in which the company now wishes to ignore is the internment, re-education of over 1 million Uyghur Muslims, routine jailing of environmental activists and civil rights campaigners, destroying over 3,000 acres of coral reefs in the South China Sea with runways, ports, and military facilities, subsidizing long-range commercial fishing fleets that threaten the viability of fishing around the world, providing $36 billion in financing to developing countries for the construction of over 102 gigawatts of coal-fired power plants. In addition, just the Patagonia businesses in China, 65% of all those businesses are run on coal. If you'd actually done your work in America, the average in the United States is only 37%, which would be a lot nicer. Now, in addition to that, the testimony you've given here has a whole bunch of false narratives in there. If I read the paragraph you said simply about Bears Ears and Grand Staircase, but specifically Bears Ears, administration's actions not only rob Native Americans, which is false, and all Americans of their natural and cultural heritage, false, threaten communities that depend on outdoor industries for economic survival, false, poison our air and water, false, wreck untold damage on vulnerable species, false, exacerbate climate change, false, and open up public lands to more extraction. Mr. Curtis, if I can yield to you for a second. You had a bill to actually legalize the Bears Ears situation and create it the proper way. Did you open up extraction in the area that was no longer part of the Bears Ears Monument that was done, unfortunately, by President Obama in Hawaii?
I regret that because of the anger in that area, nobody realized that my bill did more to protect the land than President Obama's designation. There was a mineral withdrawal throughout the entire area that President Obama had designated.
All right, we'll get this in 40 seconds, 50 seconds or less. Did you ban extraction?
Yes.
Why?
It's the right thing to do.
And was there any potential of extraction in that entire area?
No.
So that's why we were able to do it. Actually, the Association Patagonia Leads was organized to avoid paying taxes so that you can get the taxpayer to fund all these programs to assist with your bottom line. I am pleased that on the tax break that you got $10 million and you decided to put that into politics. Had you done that into something in actually enhancing the backlog problem we have in maintenance, that could have been real and that could have been something specific and that could have been happily there. Madam Chairman, I've got 15 seconds. I want to congratulate you. You are the only member on your side that has not gone over the 5-minute limit. In fact, so far, everyone totals 2 minutes and 44 seconds. We should get another speaker on our side just to do that. But I appreciate the fact there's a 5-minute limit. I'm quitting.
You're amazing. Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop. The chair now recognizes Mr. Horsford.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it gives me great honor to say that, and I'm very pleased to be on this committee. Not to belabor the comments that were just made, I'd like to divert back to the interest from my home state of Nevada, which depends heavily on public lands and has a long-standing partnership with government agencies that we work to both manage and protect the public lands in partnership together. In fact, my district, Nevada's 4th Congressional District, is home to Great Basin National Park, Death Valley National Park, Lake Mead National Recreation Area, as well as Gold Butte, Basin and Range, and Tule Springs National Monument, something that I'm proud to have worked with the ranking member Bishop in prior congressional sessions. Nevada's 4th Congressional District is also home to 3 national forests, which span more than 3.5 million acres. In total, Nevada has more than 59 million acres of public lands. 86% of our state is made up of public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and other federal agencies. Nevada's public lands provide unparalleled outdoor recreational opportunities for the people of Nevada and the visitors to our state. In 2017 alone, the National Park Service accommodated more than 6 million visits to Nevada's parks. And in 2017, visitors to land managed by the National Park Service spent more than $250 million supporting 3,281 jobs. Sadly, due to the impacts of climate change, Nevada's public lands face ever-increasing list of threats. In recent years, rising temperatures have allowed the bark beetle to multiply faster, putting more forest area at risk of infestation. Now, the bark beetle may not sound too threatening to some, but as it continues to infest our forest, it will substantially increase the forest fires and threaten the health of Nevada's national forest. Climate change continues to contribute to longer wildfire seasons in Nevada. And we've also seen a decline in our water rates at the Lake Mead National Recreational Area. All the impacts of climate change increase in scope and severity. Managers of public lands will continue to face increased challenges. So, Dr. Gonzalez, your research spoke to the disproportionate impacts of climate change on national parks in the Southwest. And I'd like to ask if you could, if we allow climate change to continue unabated, what will this mean for districts like mine?
Already, in Lake Mead National Recreation Area, in your district, climate change has combined with increased water withdrawals from cities and agriculture to lower the level of the lake to its lowest level since it was filled in the 1930s. That's in part due to a drought in the southwestern U.S. That published research has shown has been caused by human-caused climate change since 2000 and is ongoing. Continued climate change could continue to reduce water flow in the Colorado River, which threatens the level of the lake, which not only provides for the ecosystems in the area, but sustains the people of southern Nevada.
Thank you. And Mr. Cole, can you explain how the threats outlined by Mr. Gonzalez might impact outdoor recreation on our public lands?
Absolutely. And first off, Nevada is a very important state for us. We'll have upwards of 1,000 employees as of the end of this year. And
we appreciate your contribution to our state and the creation of those jobs.
Thank you. And thanks for your leadership. And those employees, for a business, we need to attract employees like that to our locations, to places like our distribution center in Reno, Nevada. And we can't do that without an attractive state to bring them into. And part of the attraction, as you've just noted, about Nevada are its public lands. It has incredible places for people to come and recreate, spend time outdoors. And so it's an attractive thing for a business like ours. I think that's the case for businesses across the spectrum in outdoor recreation, whether it's small mom-and-pop businesses on a local level that rely on protected places for their business and to bring people in, or larger ones like ours. So it's a huge economic impact for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you, Mr. Horsford. The chair recognizes Mr. Fulker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And panel, thank you for being here. I have a question for Dr. Oneil, but I need to set the stage for that. Because I think from what I'm hearing, the situation in our state of Idaho is different than what I'm hearing from my colleagues. But in our state, we've got approximately 2/3 of our land is federal land, and so we're really tenants there instead of landlords in that sense. And the problem is that our landlord's about $22 trillion in debt, and they don't have the ability to manage what's there, so they don't. And so in a given year, we'll burn up about, just in the forest areas, about 500,000 acres if you want to average it out over time. And that's kind of turned into kind of a worst of all worlds scenario because the wildlife gets decimated in that circumstance. The tons of carbon emissions get kicked up into the air. We will collectively, state, federal, spend 6-digit millions in trying to suppress it. But it just, when it's not managed at all, there's just this fuel load that builds up so much that a lightning strike, boom, hits it. And then it's decimated for our wildlife, our sportsmen, our timber industry, all of that. And so what's left of our timber industry, what's left of our sportsmen, our recreationalists, and our farmers, our ranchers, they would just like to engage in some fashion to try to put some wisdom. And that's all, just wisdom into how that land is managed, the land that's within our state borders. From your perspective and your homework, what are the biggest obstacles and some of the things that we might be able to do, just simply to take the stakeholders who live there, who want to take care of it, to have a little bit more say in how that's done?
In Washington State, we've adopted an all lands, all hands approach, where you're systematically looking at these very high-risk areas, including state, private, and federal land and tribal lands, and looking at how it is that we could create these large areas that have some resilience in them. That's sort of a shared stewardship model. They work very closely with the U.S. Forest Service to try to accomplish that kind of effort. But it wouldn't happen without on-the-ground forest collaboratives. In Washington State, we have a large number of forest collaboratives that very much speak to that local input and local outcomes. I would suggest that's a model that's usable in almost every area. They use it in Arizona. They use it in Washington State, where they're actually looking at ways that the local people can get their needs addressed, and also public-private relationships, because obviously the Forest Service or any other public agency is not in the business of marketing any kind of material that they remove, and that you do need markets to be able to sustain this stuff. We've had stewardship contracts for years, and the difficulty is being able to actually market the material, and therefore nobody bids on it, or they don't bid enough to do the work to actually create this really significant change. So it's a systemic challenge, especially if you lose your infrastructure.
Thank you, Dr. Oneil, and Madam Chair. Just a closing statement. And I really do appreciate the perspective of the panelists. And I would just invite you, if you really believe that fires in their natural state and just leaving things alone is the best thing to do for the environment, then I would just encourage you, during fire season, when we are pumping tons of carbon into the air and spending hundreds of millions to try to suppress it, I would encourage you just to come visit. We live there. It's our home. And we just want to take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fulker. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lowenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the witnesses for being here. I've sat here through this, listening to this, and I really think it reflects the fact that, later on we're going to be voting about a package to keep the government open or not, and may have some issues later on around the president thinking about a national emergency. What we're talking about here is the national emergency that the nation confronts and the planet confronts. And so I'm really glad to be part of this hearing and listen to it. Yesterday we held hearings in Natural Resources Committee on the Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee, where, again, as witnesses have pointed out, 25% of our nation's energy sources, oil, gas, coal, and then also renewables, come from federal lands. That's all the offshore, all the onshore that are under the control of the federal government, about 25%. So I think that's a great discussion. And, we've heard from some of the witnesses. I'm going to ask all the witnesses to really answer three questions. Should we be now placing a moratorium on issuing any new permits or any new leases for onshore and offshore oil, gas, and coal? Should we also look at, on existing extraction, to place a fee or a tax on fossil fuel extraction to fund some of the impacts of climate change? Should those that are contributing now, should we be looking at that? And if we are going to fund some of the impacts, what would you set up as our priorities from some kind of fee on oil extraction or carbon fee, but from federal lands? How would you spend as your highest priority in terms of some of the impacts? I'm going to go right across, start with Dr. Gonzalez. First question, should we place a moratorium on all now new development on federal lands?
The scientific research clearly shows that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels and moving to renewable solar, wind, and energy conservation and energy efficiency is the way to do that. Many policy mechanisms to do that, and the one that you've identified is one of them. It's not in my particular area of expertise to judge that moratorium, but anything that moves us away from fossil fuels is good.
Okay, Dr. Hansen, should we be placing a moratorium on all new development, permits, leases?
If our bottom line goal is to stop making this problem worse, I would say that would be a prudent course of action, especially when the injury from the action affects the very place from which that energy is being extracted.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Yes, we've already been pretty public in stating that for offshore drilling, we believe very firmly that a moratorium should be in place. And similarly for onshore, I think it's a prudent action to proceed that way.
And Dr. Oster.
That onshore and offshore oil and gas is outside of my realm of expertise as a scientist. I'm going to decline that one.
Okay. What about should we be using on existing oil extraction, which is approximately 25% of the nation's oil, gas, and coal, should we be having some kind of fee or extraction to really begin to pay for some of the both short-term and long-term impacts? And if it's so, what are the kinds of impacts, whether it's environmental, whether it's economic development, transitions, labor disruptions? How would we, if we begin to do this, how should we begin to use some of the resources? And then anybody can jump in, because we're going to have to prioritize. First of all, is there a cost to carbon extraction? And should they be part of the solution by helping to fund impacts?
Again, clearly the research shows that the real cost of fossil fuels, the social cost of carbon, has not been reflected in the price, the environmental impacts and the social costs. So any policy that can integrate that real social cost of carbon into fossil fuel use would be a good advance.
Anybody else? I think I'm running out of time.
I would just like to quickly say that solving the problem of climate change is addressing the need for fiscal prudence. The cost of the impacts of climate change is already upon us. We've already talked about a lot of the effects that have been seen in everybody's home states. What that will mean if it continues unchecked for our economy is catastrophic. Coming up with ways that we create market incentives to move us away from that and toward the economy of the future, I think is vital. I am not an economist, so I don't know what the best mechanisms are, but we certainly do need to account for those costs.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. The chair now recognizes the acting chair. And I allowed a little extra time there. Unlike Ranking Member Bishop, who did a great job bringing his comments in precisely within the time limit, however, I think he may have exceeded the limit of reasonable credibility with some of that anger and sanctimony directed at Patagonia. It seems that all of this anger and passion about doing business with China and other countries for clothing is reserved for companies that want to protect public lands and national monuments and do something about climate change and be good corporate citizens. I wish we had more even-handed sanctimony that applied to the Trump family. After all, these are the biggest hypocrites of all. They attend their MAGA rallies. They whip people into a nationalist fervor, railing against doing business and trade with China, and then they turn around and do exactly that. So I hope we can not only honor time limits, but also honor even-handedness in our sanctimony as we go forward. I was pleased by the other side's calling a witness to this hearing, the first time, I believe, in any of our Natural Resource Subcommittee hearings, Dr. Oneil, who firmly reflects the mainstream of the global scientific community in acknowledging climate change. I'm getting a little whiplash because we've heard previous witnesses that tell us no big deal, nothing to see here. But Dr. Oneil, I found your testimony refreshing and welcome. The only piece that I wanted to push back on a little is the notion that we might be able to log ourselves out of this problem or log ourselves even to fire resilience. I represent a lot of forest land and a lot of public land that has much in common with some of my Republican colleagues. And I'm glad you clarified a little bit that you're not talking about logging all the way to the beach. So I appreciated that comment very much that you made. But I think it's important to acknowledge, because I live this reality too, that the 2017 North Bay fires and last year's Mendocino Complex fire, which devastated parts of my district, burned primarily in chaparral. These were not large standing, merchantable trees. 60% of wildfires occur on chaparral and grassland, so they're not going to be stopped by logging. They're not going to be stopped even by many conventional fuels reduction projects. And these fires also are exceptional because of weather events, high winds, dry ground, all of these factors, not simply this simplistic notion that we don't cut enough trees. And so that's why many of us want to prioritize mitigation projects in and around at-risk communities, ensuring that those communities have the resource and guidance that they need to establish fire-safe neighborhoods. That's smart fire resiliency. But you might be surprised, Dr. Oneil, I think if you and I sat in a room, we would agree on a lot of things where we can do more cutting of trees and more harvesting. And we can do it thoughtfully with shaded fuel breaks. We can do thinning of some of these second and third growth plantation stands that are extreme risks for catastrophic fires. So I don't want to suggest that we're totally on opposite pages or that the choice is to discontinue all harvesting or just open the doors to unlimited harvesting with impunity. I think there's a lot of common ground that we can work on together. Now, Dr. Gonzalez, we've heard at length about logging to reduce fuel loads, and I want to ask you, does the best available science suggest that commercial logging in this fashion is a silver bullet to reduce fire risk?
Published scientific research shows the opposite. It's that preemptively using fire management, prescribed burning, and wildland fire is the way to restore ecosystem integrity to our forests and to reduce high-severity fire in the future.
Okay. Mr. Cole, I know Patagonia is based in Ventura, close to where the devastating Thomas fire burned hundreds of thousands of acres around Ventura. Was this the fire in an unthinned tree stand?
No, those fires, which did impact us heavily, we had over half of our employees evacuated at given times over the past couple of years. That was in exactly the kind of habitat you described, which is chaparral. It's coastal scrub. A policy to log more and that, would not have helped that area at all.
Okay. Moving to a different subject, we've talked a lot about our public lands being a great asset for this country and a contributor to emissions, but they can also be part of the solution through carbon sequestration, soil health, and other factors. Can you speak very briefly about regenerative agriculture and healthy soils on our public lands as a strategy to reduce emissions?
Yeah, so this is another sort of pillar of our policy and approach around addressing the climate crisis. It's regenerative organic agriculture. The concept is one that goes back literally thousands of years. It's a sort of low-till, no-till crop rotation orientation to agriculture that has huge benefits in storing carbon in the soil. And we know that simply cutting back on fossil fuels and shifting to renewables is not enough. We've got to store carbon. So this is a great approach.
I apologize that I don't have more time because we deserve to have a longer conversation about that subject, but we're out of time. Mr. Westerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
We've reached the end.
Okay, I thought we were doing a second round.
We're going to do a second round? Oh, the chair's here, man.
We've still got time on the clock.
I'm happy to. Let me leave that tough decision to the chair, though.
Thank you so much. I wanted to go until noon. We have 10 minutes, so we have time for 2 more questions, one on your side and one on ours. How's that? If you would like to go over your time, I am more than happy to accommodate you. Okay, thank you.
We're burning them now.
Exactly. Mr. Westerman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you doing a second round. I think Southerners should be given more minutes. I think we're being discriminated against because of our slow cadence in speaking, but we'll try to get more questions in this time. I would like to make a bit of a clarification. I think we have to distinguish between public lands and federal lands. We have the national parks and we have the Forest Service, which I think are two land bases that should be managed differently. Dr. Gonzalez, I know you talked about Yellowstone. I got to spend some time in Yellowstone. I never realized before going out there just how much of a lodgepole pine cohort is in Yellowstone, which we know has about a 100-year life expectancy until you get a stand replacing fire. I think the one in the 80s took out about half of Yellowstone. It's going to burn. I don't think we need to manage on Yellowstone. We can let nature manage Yellowstone. That's what's been going on there. And there's other places on our national parks where I've never promoted doing intensive management on those parks. There could be stuff in the wildland-urban interface. But the Forest Service is a different story. And I would like to just go back briefly to my previous testimony where I had the chart up that showed that active management plus using wood materials overall is a bigger carbon sink, better for the environment than just a hands-off approach to management. And I want to ask the scientist, Dr. Gonzalez, do you agree with that assessment? That management plus using wood materials is better than non-management?
Prescribed burning, again, has been shown to increase carbon storage in forests more than mechanical thinning.
Doctor, could I ask if Mr. Westerman would yield just for a clarification of his question, and I'll give you all of my time as far as I'm concerned.
All right, I'll yield to the gentleman.
I'm just wondering if you're asking categorically across the board, because sometimes we talk as if all forests and all fires are the same, and they're just
no. I'm not talking across the board, but in areas where we can actively manage, where we produce wood products, we build wood buildings, build furniture. The research shows that overall is better for the environment than no management at all. And I'm just asking if you agree with that research or do you disagree with it?
Storage and harvested wood products can increase carbon storage. But again, the point I was making was the difference between prescribed burning, proactive fire management versus logging and thinning. And it's the proactive fire management that has been shown.
I need to move on, Dr. Hanna.
My area of expertise is not forest dynamics. However, what I do know is that if, in fact, you want to have forest products in order to be harvested, we need to start managing our forest systems for future conditions. Otherwise, we will end up with not...
Agree that the adaptive management...
We need to undertake adaptation principles, yes.
And Dr. Oneil.
I've worked extensively in this area. In fact, some of the published research quantifies those differences in just leaving the forest alone or managing it for wood products to both store the carbon in the wood and store and offset the use of other materials like steel and concrete. So yes, I do agree with that.
Okay, and Madam Chair, I would like to submit for the record the charts that I put up that were so hard to read. They did come from this graduate level textbook called Global Resources and the Environment by Chad Oliver, who's a professor at Yale University, and I would like to submit those for the record that show that managing forest and using wood products are better for the environment.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Dr. Oneil, you also supplied this chart that shows federal lands, forests on the federal lands have a higher mortality rate than a growth rate, which is very concerning. Contrary to that, in my state of Arkansas, we produce 16 million more tons of wood per year every year, and with your data of 50% of that's carbon, we're actually sinking 8 million more tons of carbon per year in the state of Arkansas. The state of Georgia, it's 9.5 million tons of carbon more per year that's going into a sink. Should states like Arkansas who have healthy forests be rewarded for that versus states who have, or the federal government that have forests that have higher mortality and are emitting more carbon, storing less carbon? Should they be punished?
I'm not into the punishment.
That maybe wasn't the right word. Should there be more incentives for states like Arkansas that are sequestering more carbon?
I think the incentive is to promote and support a forest sector that will encourage that investment in growing forests and using them for harvested wood products, and then using those harvested wood products, as many of them as possible, in long-lived products. Certainly in the Southeast, we have a really vibrant forest industry, and actually that same report that looked at the national forests and the level of mortality also speaks to the fact that in the Southeast U.S. there are more acres under management, and they're harvesting more than they ever have, but yet they're carrying more than they ever had because there's investment, because there's a market, and that market promotes the reinvestment in forestry. We also see that in the Pacific Northwest in the coastal areas where you have a lot of private forest land, and the investment supports the idea of continued forest management. When we lose that market, we lose the investment potential, we lose the potential to use those lands to sequester carbon and then produce wood products. It's different calculus.
Thank you, Dr. Oneil. Thank you, Dr. Westerman. Mr. Westerman. And I'd like to make note that we did yield to your Southern cadence, so thank you for bringing that up.
And Madam Chair, would you please deduct Mr. Westerman's extra time from mine, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. I will ask the last question of this hearing, and my question goes to Dr. Hansen. The first is a yes-no question. The second one, we all ask you to expand on the answer. In your testimony, you mentioned that we need to provide our agencies with clear, informed mandates to begin preparing for climate change. In your opinion, has this administration provided these?
No.
And what should we be requiring our agencies to do?
It should be a required part of how they do business. And I'm going to preface this by saying this isn't just because of environmental interests. This should also be an interest by every taxpayer in this country. We should not be allowing decisions to be made that are not going to be effective for what we want our government to be doing for us, because they will be undermined by the effects of climate change. So the need would be for all decisions made, all actions taken by federal agencies to be evaluated for their vulnerability to climate change and designed to maximize the reduction of that risk, so that we can deliver on the promises that we're making to the American people, to future generations, and to the environment that we're stewards of.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hansen. And that concludes our hearing on this climate change in public lands. And I want to thank you all again for being here today and for helping us start this important conversation. It is imperative that we hear the best science and that we understand the impacts so that we can begin to act on climate change. Unfortunately, our colleagues across the aisle have chosen to focus on outlandish scenarios and outdated rhetoric, but these claims will not slow us down. To our witnesses, your insights and policy recommendations have been helpful and will help us craft bold and impactful legislation around climate change adaptation. Let us not forget how momentous it is that we are once again hosting these important conversations in the halls of Congress. And this is the end of the hearing.
Thank you.
I beg your pardon. I thank all the witnesses for their valuable testimony. The members of committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing under Committee Rule 3.0. Members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. There's no further business. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you. Sorry about that. Appreciate you. Thank you.